Buddy, BIBLEin365 people, we are at the book of Amos, and yes, I'm giddy about it because this one is unbelievable. It is by far one of my favorite of the minor prophets, and Amos is the bomb. Now, we just talked about some of the other prophets. We talked about Jonah, for example, whose primary ministry was to Nineveh. Amos, of course, would have been called and was called and ministered faithfully to the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, if you remember, we've talked about the history between the two as they broke up from being one nation. They became, in essence, two. You've got the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes of the north, southern kingdom of Judah to the south. And of course, Amos would have ministered to the southern kingdom. Now, it's very interesting because his ministry time would have been roughly 30 years prior to the fall of the northern kingdom, which the northern kingdom fell about 200 years before the southern kingdom did. And Amos would have known some people or known of some people based on the time that he was living in. For example, when Amos was a youngster, he was probably hearing the stories of Jonah going into Nineveh and ministering to them. He undoubtedly heard the stories or knew of or maybe even saw Elisha. And speaking of his associations with Elijah, and undoubtedly he would have heard about Joel and the plague of locusts and would have been aware of that situation. So he was a contemporary of quite a few, and his ministry was remarkable. Now, when you look at the book of Amos, Amos is powerful for a lot of reasons. Perhaps one of my most favorite reasons for why Amos is remarkable is because it speaks of the future of Israel, and it gives us a solid understanding that God is absolutely not finished with the nation of Israel. There is a way or a line of thinking that causes people to think that church is, or the church today is spiritual Israel. Nothing could be further from the truth. I believe that the Bible makes it very clear that God will be dealing with Israel directly in the last days, that is after the rapture of the church. And I have a lot of teachings about this. The church age is over once the church is raptured, and then you've got the age where God deals with the nation of Israel. But there are things going on right now that are a fulfillment of Amos chapter 9 that are pretty amazing, and I'll read you some of my favorite verses in that chapter. Let me read it to you really quickly. Verse 13 of chapter 9 says, "Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper and the treader of grapes, him that soweth seed, and the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. And I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel, that they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof, and they shall also make gardens and eat the fruit thereof." Pay attention to the next verse. "And I will plant them upon their land, and what? And they shall no more be pulled up out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God." And folks, that has happened when the nation of Israel was reestablished as a nation in 1948. The place was a wasteland. It was a dump. Nobody wanted to go to that swamp or that desert. Nobody wanted anything to do with it. Now, as we look at it, they are the number one exporters of fruit in the world, particularly in that region. We have learned many of the irrigation techniques that we use today in our modern farms from Israel. And undoubtedly, God is using Israel. And by the way, they're never going to be pulled out of their land. Give you a quick story. My mom and my dad were both born and raised in Egypt, and my grandmother always used to tell my dad and all of his siblings not to listen to Egyptian radio during the war in the 1960s. Actually said to listen to Israeli radio because the Israeli radio was not fake news. Egyptian radio was. And my grandmother felt that way simply because she recognized that if you cursed Israel, God was not going to be favorable to you. If you bless Israel, God will be favorable. And that's why I'm very concerned about the condition of the United States of America right now, because President Flashbang, a.k.a. Biden, is very, 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 very anti-Semitic in his policies and continues to do things that are driving the United States of America in a very bad direction. But we, as the body of Christ, have an obligation to act as the preserving influence that God says we are, and that is to fight the good fight and engage like we've never engaged before, whether it be in the political arena, whether it be in the spiritual arena. It all starts at the spiritual. Fight the good fight. Amos is going to be a book that's going to remind you of that. You are going to love it. It is incredible. By the way, I've done some great teaching through the book of Amos. Very informative. If you don't know anything about this stuff, go to Calvary Chapel Signal Hill, grab my studies on Amos. You will be absolutely be blessed, and hopefully you'll be encouraged to know that you are in one of the most amazing books that you are going to read in the Old Testament. All right? God bless you guys. We love you. Keep fighting the good fight.